Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Healing Brothers podcast featuring Sam Simmons and myself, Brandon Jones. We're here to have another quality discussion about things that pertain in the African American community and how we can move forward and empowering ourselves, healing, which is definitely needed, and just growing in general. Sam, anything you would like to share as we open?
Thank folks for tuning in uh, to this this new effort to uh, talk and discuss different things that are going on in the community, and even things that I think that probably folks don't necessarily think about fully, or they thought about them but didn't know how to put them in the correct words. So hopefully we can. At least that's my goal in this is to do them moments. Ooh, that makes sense, kind of thing, in a real culturally specific, trauma informed way. The boogeyman word, trauma informed.
Aren't
Yeah.
we all trauma informed, Sam? Isn't trauma informed just something that we all just do and know?
Well, the term trauma informed is that a whole, it became popular within the last several years in our field. And, you know, which basically says when you're working with clients, you should almost assume that they've had experienced some kind of trauma along the way, and you should be aware of that, right? It basically is that, in my book, another way to put it, in a real sense, is believe that everybody who walks through the door deserves compassion because you don't know their story,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's interesting when we get into the professional realm, in our mainstream realm, they have to have these special ways of saying things that in some parts of in communities of color we've been saying for a long time, right?
Right.
And even when we talk about trauma informed, they really talk about it from a systematic way, down to you need to have pictures that are not all white people, in the lobby. Yeah, okay, yeah, uh, that makes sense. But the other thing is, I think what even makes even more sense is recognizing that people of color and specifically Black folks, keeping in mind the experience that either they have grown up with, have been exposed to, and that you don't want to add to that experience. Like when they come in for pain, you give them aspirin and shoo them away, and or I heard a situation around COVID. The person came in, wanted to get a COVID test, barely got the COVID test, and sent home and died from COVID, right? And I've heard several of those stories, unfortunately, when it comes to us. And then folks want to wonder why Black folks don't trust the medical system, which is a catch-22. Because if you don't trust the medical system, especially, and then you don't go get checked until it's last minute, the whole thing about cancer. Remember the whole thing about cancer, man? If you're scared about you got cancer, you don't. Oh man, if I go to the hospital, they're gonna find it, and then I'm
Right.
gonna die. No, you've been having problems for a while, but by the time you get there, so it ends up being self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways. I've seen it happen in my own family. My uncle had a stomach ache for about 5 years. By the time he did go to the doctor, it was so far gone that there wasn't nothing they could do for him, right? That kind of thing. So yeah, trauma informed care is supposed to be about recognizing, you know, that people have their stories, and those stories affect how they see things. Because I always said, trauma affects how we see things, how we hear things, and how we relate to things. And so again, I narrow it down to believing that no matter if I understand you, even if I'm not sure, or if I might not uh, uh, feel like I care about you right away, that everybody, if I'm working with people, everybody deserves compassion. Everybody deserves compassion. And I think if we could think about it that way, that everybody who we come encounter deserves compassion, um, will go a long ways in terms of that, uh, um, trauma informed care.
Got it. So, trauma informed care is something that is talked about amongst professionals in the social service and what I call the helping professions, educators, things of that nature. But for common folks, that's not a term that often comes up, but we still should go about life and being quote unquote trauma informed because we don't know what people experience. We don't know what happens. And I think as Black folks, we often have this kind of intuition that something may be wrong with other people, but we might still treat them the same as if something isn't. So we kind of have to be trauma informed just in our day-to-day lives in general as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the problem I see sometime in the community, we have experienced so much trauma that we can. With sometime, I don't think we can sort it out in our lives. I mean, so much of our lives dependent on, I mean, think about it. I mean, if we talk about specifically, say, African Americans with American slavery in their lives, their experience in America involves trauma from day one, right?
Right.
And as a resilient people, and that'll come up periodically, we have been fighting that battle of trauma being accepted by America. And so, I mean, little nuances that we talk about in terms of our culture is really guided by our response to trauma. Like, for example, the idea that when you leave the house, you have to dress well. That came out of that response to stereotypes. I believe stereotypes have even a higher emotional effect on us than the folks who come up with them, right? Who treats us, according to stereotypes. We had the Sambo caricatures that we were lazy, that we need extra help and that kind of stuff, and being that I'm part of I'm in my 60s. That whole idea that, and if you look at old pictures, dressing well to let you know that I'm not no Sambo was very important, right? And you still see that where so much emphasis is on how you look externally, right? Sometimes you can see it as a response to what we at the time trying not to be or fit into what we thought white folks thought of us, right?
Right.
And so if we took a serious, and I know it's a difficult look, but if we took a serious look into some of the things that we connect to our culture, you'll see that their response to trying to fit in, trying to be accepted as another human being, because America and other systems around the world have done, especially America has done such a great job at trying to portray us as less than human. And so, and I think we mentioned this last week, the whole idea that, African Americans have fought in every war in America. And I believe the whole idea was just to prove we care about America too. It's like right. You get folks talking about go back to where we come from. This is where we come from. And why do we have to go somewhere for you to do right by me, right? And so I say all that to say is we have been overcoming the dealing with all this trauma, but we've been rolling with the punches, and we never really stopped to lick our wounds, right? And some people say, well, we don't have time to lick our wounds because we're still catching hell. I remember doing a presentation, a young girl said, Mr. Simmons, how did your community heal if it's still catching hell? Well, the thing is we don't have no other choice. right? We really don't have no other choice but to heal. When I say heal, I'm not necessarily talking just individually. I'm talking about as a community. How do we heal internally in a community and and show each other compassion? That brings that C word back again, right? You know, so we can address things like the issues around community violence, sexual violence, but even also being able to really appreciate the positive things that we have brought um, um, to this system, right? Because sometimes I don't think we even have time to really appreciate the positive things we brought to the system. And I'm talking about more than giving America some flavor, because you know America giving it some flavor. It's like
Right.
talking about, you know, people talking about certain white foods are bland until they get them seasonings. You know, get them seasoning, got to get some seasoning. Let me leave with. Well, we are a people who brought some seasoning to America. Can you imagine America without no black seasoning and a little bit of dancing? You know, it's always been interesting. Like, for example, football. Man, white folks were so mad when brothers would be dancing in the end zone and you know, and they banned dunking. You know, in the early NBA when we, you know, we could jump over folks, right, and that kind of stuff. It's like everything we did that was better than them, they wanted to ban. Now they want to celebrate it all, right? When and so it's interesting how that spending all that time trying to make us less than human actually made it so everybody lost out, right? This think about if you done nullified a whole group of people. Look at how many geniuses we lost out on as a country, right? We know what we have lost in our community, but the losses are, like it or not, as Black people, what happens to us is national and has the national effect. Because when it happens to us, it happens to all of us in terms of humanity. So, no, there I go off on the deep end, but
That's what we do on the Healing Brothers podcast. Go off on the deep end, get ourselves in trouble.
hey, but again, my thoughts is, how do we as a people address what's going on between us and the community, and not give up our work against systems, our work against change. How do we figure out a way to do both? Because the thing is there's some stuff that we really need to do internally, and really spend more time showing each other compassion and forgiveness, that I don't think we often do. I mean, when we do, sometimes we have a tendency to be more all or nothing and more punishing than even what we say about the systems, right? It's like looking at some of the violence perpetrated by some of our young people, and not wanting to deal with the fact that how did they get that way, right? We always want to tell white folks we ain't born violent, and I believe that's true. We're not born violent, right? Or parts
Right.
of our community is not born violent. How do we bite the bullet and get to, how do we get here? And yeah, we can talk about poverty, and we can talk about a lot of different things the systems have done, and that's part of it. But it's a lot of it is our responses to those situations in the systems, right? We did a round robin the last week, but that whole thing around my whole belief around the that crack era, right? And it is an era, and we're not finished with that era, right? Because again, as a community, we've been resilient, and when I think about resilient, we're still here. We are still. They haven't knocked us all the way down, even though it's been hard. But one of the things I realized about resilience is resilience doesn't always include love.
Right.
And it don't always include compassion. You know, I grew up in a family that believed in tough love to the toughest nth degree, right? And especially when it comes to boys, right? You know, we ain't got time to cry, and you know what you crying for, boy? What's wrong with you, and that kind of stuff. And that all of that came with that resiliency, and we don't have an honest conversation about that. But when I look at young people today, um, they are the grandchildren, and in some cases, great grandchildren of the children who struggled through the crack era, right? When there was no compassion. Systems didn't show us no compassion. Um, we what you know, you got 10, 12-year-old children struggling to hold families together, right? Um, um, Scared all the time. You had a whole generation scared all the time. Who could you trust? In some communities, who could you trust?
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to roll with that. Then you want to be surprised when I get to a point where I'm numb to other people's feelings and that kind of thing, right? And so you got the emotion of fear connected with anger, and no other connection to all the other feelings. Even the issue of deserving love. What does love mean, right? Is love codependency? What does it mean to love yourself in a community that says the collective is more important than the individual? You know, how do I work through all of that when I say to hell with this, I'm gonna take care of myself, and people punish you for that in your own family. So
Yeah.
um, there's some real things that we internally need to deal with, and that means that one of the things in terms of healing as a community is dealing with honesty. I mean, honesty is a mug, and when I say honesty, we're talking about downright cold, get ugly kind of honesty that is really hard to deal with. Uh, uh, because as a people, when you are a people who's looked at in a negative light, the last thing you want to deal with is something negative. But I've learned that hardcore honesty about family and about how I felt and about the treatment of my family, right? We want to sometime people call it making excuses, because I believe there's a fine line between excuse and understanding. Is that when we talk about corporal punishment of our children, right? There's some real conversations that need to have about that, right? Um, and part of it is doing a full understanding of where it comes from. I mean, especially some of the corporal punishment that you used to see with boys, right? A lot of that corporal punishment ended up being out of the fear of their lives, right? And then stifling that I'm not scared of anything, right? But I'm scared for you, right? Beat that hard headedness out of you, and when people say, well, I was beaten, I turned out just fine. And the last dude who told me that, I said, ask your family, right? Well, I'm divorced. Oh, really? And I'm not saying that. The thing is this, what is the bigger picture? Yeah, you survived it,
Mhm.
right? But wouldn't it have been nice? And again, I when it comes down to spanking and all this other kind of stuff, it gets nuanced.
Right.
And the other piece is when you are a people who are being beat down on a regular basis, who is not given the chance to have a real conversation with your child, right? And you scared for your child's life, right? You don't always feel like you have the time to sit down with your child and say, look, baby, this is why you can't do this, blah, 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 and that kind of stuff. Because systems have never gave us second chances.
Mm.
So I understand that piece. When you are not given a second chance by systems and like what I was talking about, boys, being afraid in some towns. I was raised in a small town on the Mississippi River called Rock Island, and people talk about sundown towns. Now, some people wouldn't have never called a sundown town, but when you if the and people say, well, you had to be in the house because of the street lights. That wasn't just because of nothing. In black communities, that was also for safety, right? Because you get stopped by the police minding your own business, and they'll treat you like, what are you doing out here this time of night? Like, well, I got to get permission from you. And so you got this child who's feeling himself, and he says, I ain't scared of white people, but I am. And I remember people would say, I'd rather beat you down than let them kill you. Think about that understanding of guidance in terms of parenting. And if you continue that over generations without reevaluating that, right, you run into problems. And then when systems who are not compassion and especially not into trying to understand you, because they want to build every punishment based on their beliefs and what makes them comfortable, right? That we run up against these, not just the roadblock of being black in America, but just the roadblock of trying to survive the trauma, trying to live up to this artificial ideal of what it means to be an American in America as a black individual. And you have this child, and again, your way of surviving is, I'd rather beat you than to let them kill you.
So you bring up survival, right? And you tell this story all the time about being in group and talking to these young men about resiliency. And the young man who gives you his description of resiliency. Can you tell that story? And then I'm gonna follow up with a question about survival stress management.
Yeah, well, as I told this story, is that in the men's group I do, and actually not just the men's group, my young pregnant moms groups, groups, and we're talking about people probably on average between 20 and maybe 30, 31, 32 years old. And so we talk about trauma. We talk about trauma. And one young man comes to the group, and he tells me the story about his grandmother. His grandmother questioned where was he going every Tuesday at 6:00. And he tell, because that was unusual to her. It's like this cat's getting up every day, every Tuesday, and going to group. It's like, what's up with that, right? And she said, baby, where you be going at 6:00 on Tuesdays? And he tell her, I'm going to Mr. Sam's group, right? That's how he know it. You know how we are, associate a group with the person. And she says, well, what do you do in that Mr. Sam's group? Well, we talk about things like relationships, and we talk about trauma. And she said, y'all talk about trauma? She said, why would he talk about trauma being so negative? And she said, tell him that we're resilient people and quit being so negative. So he come back and he tell me, and I let him know, well, tell your grandmother thank you. But what do you think resiliency is? And his response was, We're still here. In other words, they ain't killed us off yet. And he wasn't the only one in the room who the rest of them said, yeah, man, Mr. Simmons, what do you think of that? You know, because they were all proud of themselves because they had an answer, right? And in that moment, I learned a lot in that moment because when I connected the dots, that was how they were living their life in that moment. We're still here.
And that, I think that's one of the essence of this concept of survival stress management is adapting in the moment to what is going on and just trying to feel good, but not really seeing what the consequence of the action may be. And what happens is it limits our ability to see what's our vision for the future, or can there be something better? Can you talk a little bit more about what survival stress management is?
Well, the thing again, you just pretty much describe it, but it's really about not being afraid of consequences, at least not conscious of consequences in the moment, right? It's about what feels good in the moment. It's about it's like, for example, if you use sex uh, sex as stress management, right? And that's including if you had all the sex education classes in the world and you know about pregnancy, you know about condoms and all these things in terms of that, because I've dealt with social workers. I can't understand how they gonna have all these babies, who they think gonna take care of them, and it's like all this judgmental talk without getting to the root of what's going on, right? And so if you use sex for stress management, in the moment, I'm not thinking about no pregnancy. I'm not thinking about nothing but to get my freak on. And because we're like 3 generations in this real traumatic experience resulting after the crack era, not only that, I want the full effect. And if I want the full effect, I'm not using no condoms. Even though consciously, if you set that person down one-on-one and you say, do you believe in safe sex? They might say, yeah. But if I'm using sex for stress management at that particular time, hey, we're going to get all freak on. Now, the problem is after the fact, when the pregnancy comes, we get diagnosed with some kind of a disease or whatever, we want to act all sheepish, right? How did that happen? What do you mean, how did that happen? What do you mean, did you use condom? No. Or I love it when the guy said, well, she said she was on the pill. Why is it you give up your responsibility for your sexuality, or you're giving up on who you are to her?
Mm. Right.
Where are you responsible?
Right.
So you're gonna pass that responsibility on her, and when guys do that in the group, I shut that down right away. Right?
I have a theory on why that happens. We'll get to that in a moment.
Well, I mean, it's like because they'll go all yeah. The thing is you didn't think about that. No, you didn't think about that. Now you want to cry about the consequences, right? Now you want to cry about the system ain't fair. Well, the system wasn't fair before you had the sex either. And so now you got situations where you got 3-4 kids and everybody wants child support, and you talking about how am I supposed to work a legal job? And then you want me to feel some kind of way about that. And so the thing is understanding that. Same thing when we talk about, because there's all these disparities, absolutely, in our systems, but some of those disparities get fed by this survival stress management. If I use food, and in our community, historically, we have used food and alcohol at the highest level to party, right?
Feel good.
Yeah. And so the thing is, I'm not mad at it. See, because people, when you bring this kind of stuff, people get all mad. What you trying to say? What you trying to say? White folks do that. I mean, but I'm not talking about white folks.
I
I
say
don't
that
give
all
a
the
damn
time.
about white folks in this conversation right now.
But you have to. We're addicted to white people. We can't
Hey,
focus
I
on
do
ourselves
not.
without.
Anytime you add white folks to this kind of conversation, the conversation goes haywire. What white folks doing? They got their own issues. They're walking around in delusional ideals like the people in power give a damn about them. What you talking about? I have a different conversation with them. We gotta have a conversation because the thing is, if you use food for stress management, you do not want no salad. You want the chocolate cake.
You want that pasta. You want
Yeah.
that Alfredo, that mac and cheese.
Hey, matter of fact, and then if it gets a really bad day, right, and you're lonely, you get the chocolate cake, half of it, go in your bedroom and watch some god awful reality show where you see more trauma,
Man.
right? And make it so bad, I got clients who act out that crazy trauma stuff off of them reality shows and think that's okay.
That's what love looks like in 2021.
What was that?
That's what love looks like in 2021.
Hey man, shoot. You talking about 2021, man. We still got a few days of 2020. You see the new commercial on the match commercial with the devil?
No.
Oh yeah, man. It's wild. Got the
Match.com.
devil and he done been matched with 2020. Oh, it had me rolling. You know.
Man. Was it Match.com?
Yes.
I had to look that up. No, I haven't seen that, but I can only imagine. You know, I mean, I don't want to get too off, but dating has been really hard. I've heard from a lot of people dating has been hard during 2020 just due to COVID, and people are really struggling with their dating lives due to how the pandemic has panned out so far. So I'm not surprised that they're coming out with
man, COVID has been hard on marriages and in engagements and all kind of stuff, right? You know, we think we know our significant other before COVID. If you stuck in the shutdown, you're gonna learn how much you did know or not know, you know, in terms of your partner, you know. So yeah, COVID opened up a can of worms. COVID opened a can of worms for all kind of delusional stuff we've been walking around with here in America, right? And anything that was already there that's got exacerbated or increased than it was before, the stuff that was already there. But back to the survival stress management, I think the reason I'm glad you brought this up is I think this is a very serious ass problem. Right?
Absolutely,
because if you think about parts of the community, and again, you know, there's gonna be somebody. What about white? No. I'm not talking to them because yeah, they
addicted to
do
white
sick ass stuff. That's true. But the issue is, like I gave the example of if you use sex for stress management, you're gonna have more kids than you can handle. If you use food for stress management, you're more less likely to want you to eat salads and that kind of stuff. If you use alcohol for stress management, all these kind of stuff, fast money for stress management, what feels good in the moment. Because the thing is the reason I bring this stuff up is like when I'm dealing with workers and they talk about, well, what about the woman who took her rent money and bought her a new red dress and went out? Well, shoot, girlfriend's like, shoot, I ain't done nothing for fun. I'm dealing with these kids. And well, I didn't have them kids. But man, all of that might be true. If you want to get to the core of what's going on with folks, you got to leave all that judgment stuff on the side. Nobody says we don't want to hold people accountable and all this other kind of stuff, because I ran into that. I believe in accountability. I believe in what we call compassionate accountability. And that probably will be a whole show by itself. But the issue is in that moment, girlfriend got her little red dress, got it on sale, went out and partied with her girlfriends, and then on Sunday, probably cried all afternoon wondering how she gonna pay her rent. But when you've been dealing with crises, when your life has been one crisis after another, unfortunately, you're not scared of crises like other people might be scared of crises, right? And I've seen some people that when their lives start getting to be calm and comfortable, get scared to death. Get scared to death. Because think about it. Think about what we brag about as black people. We can handle some crises. We're resilient people. Well, why do you want to only be resilient for the fact that you can do, bad things and you can handle all kind of bad things? What about being able to just be happy and not worry about all that stuff? You see it again when we talk about survival stress man, how part of our community uses money, right? Buying stuff. I know a lot of my counterparts who make a lot more money than I do. Broker than Cootie Brown. Stressed out to the end. Yeah, they got a 99-foot TV and they got more house than they need and all this other things. And it's like, what are you doing? So how do I feel that empty hole in me that wants to feel good, feel like I deserve to be happy? Well, we got to find other ways to be happy by letting go of some of the traumatic stuff that we carry. So how do we get people to deal with consequences on the front side? The other problem with survival stress management, what people don't want to talk about, you do know that over the top excitement is part of survival stress management. What I mean by that, shooting at people, killing folks,
right,
being violent in the moment feels good. And I've dealt with cats who've been in gangs and stuff. And then when later on they get really drunk and get really high to deal with those whatever left of those emotions that haven't been killed off by their own traumatic experiences. Right. Being able to tell the story about how you done hit somebody up in the head. You done walked up on a bus stop and hit somebody and this hit somebody who wasn't looking. That's the thing about this whole survival kind of stress management. When your enjoyment is at the cost of everybody else. And then when people come down on you, you want to talk about what ain't fair. Well, the system ain't never fair. And we don't get to choose the punishment we're going to get. We know statistically our punishment is going to be greater than a white individual. We know that. We'll articulate that on a good day. But that has an effect that in some parts of our community, that doesn't change behavior. It's like I deal with systems and judges and all them other kind of stuff. And they're slowly, some of them are figuring this out. Giving people more time who used to doing time don't change their behavior.
It's just a break. It's a little vacation.
Well, the thing is, if you're used to suffering, you know how to suffer more than you know how to be happy. Right. That ain't changing your behavior. I call that emotional masturbation. When you get full of yourself, well, we're tough on crime, and we're going to give you an extra 5 years for a gun. When you ain't taking in consideration, you have a whole community of young people who are scared to be without a gun, who don't intend to use the gun. The problem is, if you got a gun, you're going to use it.
Right.
Especially when you don't have no training and you have the gun for the wrong reasons.
Now you bring up this gun thing, and I've had this idea that I've been throwing out there, counter culture and thought process. But if we actually had a gun training program that taught these young black boys, because it's mostly young males, how to actually respect their weapon, take care of their weapon, understand their weapon, we might not have as many deaths, or they actually might shoot at the people and actually make the targets better and not shoot random innocent folks. But we might actually have a better outcome when it comes to the gun violence, because it's a different type of approach to the gun. Now that's a very out there outlier type of thought process, but it's just like the military.
There's black gun right groups who actually talk about that, right? Who actually talk about that. But now you're talking about people who are not necessarily living their lives from a survival stress management point, right? Now you have to plan some shit, right? That's the difference, right? Once you start thinking about stuff, right? Because in my group, the only thing I'm doing is getting them to not just react, because that's what we're really talking about, reacting to the moment and then feeling sorry later. We want folks to think about feeling sorry beforehand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that they're not crazy. There's bad things happening to them, and they're responding to bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is not only the bad things are happening to them in terms of the system, but a lot of the major close to home bad things are happening to them within their homes and within their communities.
Right.
And we don't have enough conversations about how to deal with that. So, it's like if you bring up the violence in the community, yeah, we know that what contributes to that is poverty and all this other kind of stuff, but it's more than that, right? It's much more than that, because and it doesn't come to be a way of, in some cases, proving it's a hyper level of toxic masculinity that goes along with it. Right.
Mm.
And then we don't even want to have a conversation about the violence that is perpetrated by young girls, right? Who are fighting with each other, fighting off dudes, and then fighting each other over the same damn dude.
Yep. The number one increasing population for suspensions before COVID was black females, young black girls, all age ranges.
Right.
Fighting all the
time. And they have a right to be angry, because see, so long is their anger was ignored because they based their anger on white women anger, right? Which is ignored anyway, right? Because but black women have had reason to be angry for all kind of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I got your back, brother, and then at the same time, when you feeling all emotional, I'm supposed to take your ass whooping too.
Right. Yeah.
Or try to protect you when you ain't protected me, and then want to get your little feelings hurt when I turn around and say I don't need you. Oh, wow. That's the worst thing you can say to a black man. That's the worst thing you can say to a man in general. But if you tell a black man you don't need him, now all of a sudden you get called out all your name out there. But the thing is, and then you have the other side to this, because I know a lot of good black men who talk about, man, I try to be nice, and what am I supposed to do? Girlfriend done been in so many relationships fighting. She wants to fight. I ain't got time to be fighting.
Right.
So everybody's scared, trying and still want to be in relationship, right?
Yep.
Still want to be in relationship, right? But now you don't trust black men, and black men don't trust no women, because they think all of them are out to get them, even the ones who ain't got nothing to get, right? It's like, what is up with you, right?
Right.
And you got this drama. And see, when we talk about all of this trauma stuff was stuff that's happened to us, and this is the result of what happened to us.
Yeah,
right?
We picked it up and just kept it moving, and generation after generation.
Yeah, and this is the stuff. So this is the result of what has happened to us. So it ain't our fault, but it's our responsibility to deal with the trauma and get honest about how being traumatized over 400 years, how does it show up? How does it affect our relationships? How does it affect our families?
Mm-hmm.
right? And the losers, unfortunately, is the children.
Exactly.
It's the
Exactly.
children. And the ironic part is black people love their children.
Hmm.
If you, I know that doing my men's group, if I say, well, I don't want to hear nothing else. Let's talk about your children. Their whole demeanor change. Now, that don't mean
Hmm.
that they're good fathers, that they're good mothers, or any of those kind of stuff, because they might not have all the skills. But
Yeah.
they see, if you talk about their children and you equate the kind of trauma experiences that they might have experienced, that might be showing up in their children, they'll hear you
Yeah.
because we care about our children.
Right.
The problem is if we don't shed some of that childhood trauma,
Trauma.
that that we've been convinced that some of it is the culture,
There it is. There it is.
it's hard, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And then not knowing how to have relationship before having over the top intoxicating sex,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Don't know how to be. I remember I was talking to a bunch of men. Have you ever been a friend with a woman? I can't be, maybe an ugly one. It's like, and then ironically, the youngest dude in the group, 20 years old, he said, "Man, my girl is my best friend, and we ain't together."
Mm.
He said, "I learned." He said, "I grew up in a family that was so toxic it was ridiculous. All the men and everybody in the family." He says, "And I'm not the best dude
Yeah.
in the world because that's why girlfriend ain't with me."
Right.
And probably was the best thing for her not to be with me because I didn't know how to be in a relationship. But she's
Right.
my friend. And the reason I think it's important for her to be my friend is for my children.
Right.
And you got to hear the rest of the older dudes just freak out because the young dude, he sometimes be talking real reckless in the
Yeah.
group, but he got real on them. And
Yeah. And I have a theory to why that is. We've
okay,
had so many generations of young black children, especially black boys, that have not had what we call lap time in the psychology world. They haven't had that compassion and that love and that attachment that they're supposed to have with their parents, that they try to replicate that once they become parents themselves, but they don't have a foundation on what that should look like. So they understand that emotion, but they might not understand how it functions. So they may do things like not be with the person instead of trying to figure out the best way to be with them because it feels better and they know that they can still have a relationship with their child.
right.
And I think that that's one of the things that we really struggle with our with I would say our generation Z's and then our millennials and generation Z's is that we are part of what I call the institutionalized generation, where we are growing up in a different type of society than the prior generations, but at the same time, our outlook on things like community relationships and culture are very different. And since Generation X, that transition of being assimilated into schools and all this other stuff that has gone on in the 70s and 80s, we really have a disconnect from what our community could and should actually look like because we're actually recreating generations every generation. Like there's not the only thing that's, and this is my bias, but the one of the things I see is the only thing being passed down is trauma. And there's not a lot of lessons, or it's just what we call survival stress management. That's what's being passed down as the culture from one generation to the next. So each generation is like starting completely over from the previous, and we're not building upon anything but the pain.
Well, and I agree with you for the most part, but I think the significance of the crack era, all of the
Very.
slogans died.
Exactly.
We had
Exactly.
all kind of slogans.
Yep. The memes, the way
Yeah,
we pass messages from one generation to the next. Absolutely.
that crack era generation ain't trying to hear none of them slogans.
Joe 8.
They ain't trying to hear none of that old school stuff, that I grew up with, they ain't trying to hear that because they were struggling for their lives as children. let's keep it. I mean, the thing is my generation was a lot of us wasn't there for them babies. Some of us was the problem, right?
That's
And
true.
and the thing is, it's not about good or bad, and it's not about making nobody feel bad. It's about let's deal with it real. We were all catching hell during that time. You had brothers coming back from Vietnam. There was no investment in the cities. We were being under attack by the police departments. We
Yep.
were being attacked by the government with our three strikes and you're out. All that kind of stuff, right?
Jobs were
And then
being
you
sent overseas through globalization. Yep.
right,
All that.
and
Yep.
then you so excuse me, and then you end up with all this crack in the neighborhood, which really had such a devastating effect on not just the men but the women, which in turn had an effect on the kids. And then out of that we came up what we call the rape culture, where because men just didn't want to have no respect for women whatsoever after that, right? And so we get the rape culture, and we end up with high in terms of the more strip joints and all these other kind of stuff. And again, I don't care one way or the other about that, but what I'm saying is when you can't have a sexual relationship with somebody because you love them, and it's got to, because I remember this woman told me, she says, I can always tell if a dude watch a lot of pornography because he gonna want me to do all kind of flips and gymnastics, the impossible gymnastics, because he done seen this on. And so when love went outside of sexuality, because at least with sexuality, that was one time you could say show caring and feel close. Now that it has to be a performance art, and then on top of that, out of that you end up with children, and then you get this whole thing about, like at least with the young men. The problem is they without having sex with this survival stress management, you end up with this pregnancy that you didn't plan for, right? Because I got guys who don't believe you can have all the sex you want responsibly and not have kids. Now you got to plan for stuff like that, right? You got to be willing to walk away from some sex, right? So the thing is now you got this child, and then what happens, especially with a lot of my young men, the girl finally convinces him as his child, because initially a lot of them were like, man, because you know how the brothers be talking, I heard you was with Pookie and them, that ain't my baby. And then, then they convince them it's their baby. So first of all, you insult the girl, right? But unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going along with that. You're convinced that it's your child. Now all of a sudden you want to take over. Now all of a sudden you want to be in a relationship, right? You want to make a family because you ain't never had one. Because at 6 years old, you decided you was going to be different than your daddy, if that's the case. And we're even talking about men who were raised with their fathers, who didn't have an emotional connection with their fathers, have the same result. So let's keep it real, because there's a lot of us who were raised with our daddies and didn't have no emotional connection, end up with some of the same responses as brothers who weren't raised with their daddies. Okay? And then all of a sudden you want to put all this pressure on girlfriend. And now y'all trying to have a relationship on the back of the children.
Man.
No child supposed to be brought in this world to hold together no relationship. Or, and then unfortunately with some of the young ladies I work with, every major relationship they got a child from it. And then you want to wonder why she's bitter. Don't want to be alone, but how do I trust anybody because I can't trust my own emotions? Because I haven't learned how to define what a real healthy relationship. A healthy relationship, it happens when you work on being healthy yourself.
Right.
But it's hard to do that when you done seen relationships through the lens of trauma, right?
Right.
The stories that my guys tell about the trauma they grew up with in terms of the relationships they seen. I said, tell me about the good ones in your family, right? But we got about, what do we have? About 3 minutes.
Yeah, you don't want to give them too much. Any final words on survival stress management? Why this
Well,
is an idea? Yeah, go ahead.
the big piece is how do we help people think about things on the front side so they don't have to keep suffering on the backside. See, the bad thing about survival stress management, you are using it to feel good, but end up making things worse, right? So, as you kind of mentioned, as a people, we know how to start over because if we look at the different decades and the different blows as Black people that we've taken, we know how to start over. How do we sustain relationships? How do we come out this on the positive side and be okay with being and learning how to be happy, quietly happy, not noisily happy, but quietly happy. That was a tough one for me.
What do you mean quietly happy? I can't have my Ferragamo outfit on and my Givenchy shirt. I can't be happy with all my jewels on, my
Happy
Richard
without
Mille
chaos, right? Boring happy. Where you just come home and all you in this and then this be okay with your meal and this kind of hanging out with your family. That's what I'm saying. I mean, we done dealt with 3 generations of chaos. Well, more than 3. I mean, we've been dealing with all this chaos and trying to survive this trauma, this craziness from white folks and systems, and don't even know how to have a conversation without including them.
Right.
Man, forget that. They can look and they can observe, but I'm not scared of saying real stuff in front of white folks. That one other thing. Well, we can't be saying that in front of white folks. They use it against us. Man, they don't have to wait to use that against us. They could care less.
I've been trying to tell people that for years, man.
Dude, keeping secrets. You ain't keeping secrets, but from you. The only secret you keeping is from you. Man, we out of time. We're over time.
We are over time, but it's been time, and it's good to have another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast. We'll be tuning back in next week.
Yeah, and we will pretty soon get a regular schedule going on and all the little nice stuff that people do, but we thought we'd give it a try.
Absolutely. Make sure that you tune in and subscribe to the Healing Brothers YouTube channel. We'll try to drop that link in the comment section, both on Facebook. And for those who did join us on YouTube, thank you. Be sure to also share the video, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.